Hey everyone! Today we're going to be talking about Verity. This is the third full-length album by Ukrainian black metal band Nokturnal Mortum. Since their 2009 album, The Voice of Steel, Nokturnal Mortum have cemented their place among the elite of the folk black metal sphere, with monstrous tracks such as Ukraine. They play a style of black metal that borrows heavily from their heritage, with lots of traditional folk instruments, interplaying with ferocious and mid-paced black metal. This album features instruments such as a sopilka, they have a jaws harp, a dulcimer, a bandura, and a goat's horn, to name a few. The lore and mythology of Ukraine is a huge influence on the themes and the atmospheres of this album. This is apparent from the tone set by the intro track, I'll Meet You in Ancient Darkness. It has an eerie atmosphere. The goat's horn is used throughout it, nocturnal creatures can be heard in the background, along with what sounds like someone angrily speaking to a group of people. It's hard to tell what exactly is going on, though, because everything is spoken in Ukrainian, but translations of the titles give some insight into the shamanic and spiritual nature of these songs. The second song is called Molfa, which is an enchanted object that is used in magical practice in Ukrainian mythology. Lots of other titles have spiritual connotations as well, such as Night of the Gods and With Chort in My Bosom, which is a reference to a Ukrainian demon called Chort. This track Molfa has lots of dynamics in the speed, starting out slowly in the beginning with a mix of guitars and folk instruments that builds into these intense blast beats that are complemented by a bandura. This mix during the blast beat section reminds me a lot of the new Seor album with its grand use of folk instrumentals, although this album uses Celtic folk instruments as opposed to the classical Ukrainian ones used here. Along with some similarities to Seor, the new Moonsorrow album, Yumaltan Aika, also uses folk instruments and has a very shamanic atmosphere with a Finnish twist. There is lots of interplay later in the song with a call and response part between the guitars and a sopilka. There's also this really ethereal instrumental break near the end of the song with an eerie synth and that almost sounds like a theremin, along with what sounds like a subtle electronic beat. With Chort in My Bosom continues with a similar sound as Molfa, but with more emphasis on the folk instruments. The drums here border on progressive, with some really unorthodox drum beats, at least for this style of metal. The clean vocals are back as well, but with a very defeated sound. Nokturnal Mortum are at their best when they can interplay the guitars and the folk instruments nicely, as opposed to one stepping all over the other. The larger presence of folk instruments in this song pushes the guitars into the background, and the guitar suffers as a result. There are few notable guitar parts on this song, and a large part of the time, it sounds very similar to the last song, and if I wasn't paying attention, I may have thought it was from the same song. This is especially considering Nokturnal Mortum have been known to write really long tracks. The Voice of Steel featured some mammoth songs, such as the nearly 12-minute My Dream Islands, the 11-minute Valkyrie, and the closer White Tower, which also comes in at nearly 12 minutes. The folk instrumentals are always great on this album, but it's not necessarily enough to save this track. Unfortunately, this happens a lot across the album, as it's very difficult for both of the instrumentals to shine at the same time. However, they show that this isn't impossible with Song of the Snowstorm, which has several passages that brilliantly bring the guitars and the folk instruments and the drums all together to an intense climax. The song also makes room for 2 separate guitar solos, and even a bandura solo. But this problem creeps up again on In the Boat with Fools, where a string orchestra completely overwhelms the guitar and gives it a very muddy sound. From here, the songs take a bit of an unorthodox turn, expanding on the ideas presented in the first few. Wolfish Berries incorporates more creepy atmospherics and lots more of the chanted vocals. Black Honey goes for a far more subdued sound with a funky organ in the background, some repetitive songwriting, and dazed chanting over the majority of the track. On Wild Weregild and Lyra, the cover, Nokturnal Mortum uses confident group chants and very fun and lively folk instrumentation. These 2 songs are the closest that Nokturnal Mortum gets to being a pure folk metal band. After a while, though, the album starts to wear thin. This album would greatly benefit from some editing and a more selective choice of songs. At 74 minutes, there is a huge wealth of material here that becomes pretty exhausting. There are several tracks that are either a little lackluster or add very little to the album, such as Spruce Elder, which very closely follows the sound of With Chort in My Bosom, or Lyra, which is a cover of another Ukrainian band. The last 3 tracks are mostly fine, but they suffer by being at the tail end of this exhausting 74-minute journey. Black Honey makes for a nice palate cleanser, Night of the Gods has a very strong and dire atmosphere, and Where Do the Wreaths Float Down the River finishes off the album nicely with more eerie and mystical atmosphere, although it goes on a minute or so too long. Overall, this album has some really inspired songwriting, But a significant part of the time, the guitars are weighed down by the folk instruments and left behind in the mix with a muddy and unpleasant sound. If you're a fan of the band's previous work, if you're a fan of folky black metal in the style of Moonsorrow and Sayor, or if you just want to hear folk instruments cleverly mixed with guitars, then you should definitely give this a listen. If you like traditional black metal with a more straightforward guitar-oriented songwriting, then a large bit of this may leave something to be desired. What did you think of this album? I would love to know your thoughts. Alright, that's going to be it for this one. I'll see you guys next time.